Hi, welcome to today's lecture, Elements of Poetry, Structure and Forms. I had previously said that it was going to be specifically on lyric poetry, but I decided to include all the structures and forms in one lecture. So without further ado, let's get started with structure and form. Let's start with some basics. Poetry is writing chosen and arranged to create a certain emotional response through meaning, sound, and rhythm. Prose is everything else, ordinary language that people use when they speak or write. Lines in a poem may be short or long. They're not necessarily complete sentences or even complete thoughts. The arrangement of lines, spacing, and whether or not the lines rhyme in some manner can define the form of the poem. A stanza is a group of lines whose rhyme scheme is usually followed throughout the poem. A division in poetry, like a paragraph in prose. It's also a common stanza pattern, including couplets, triplets, and quatrains. Free verse poems follow no rules regarding where to divide stanzas. So a stanza is basically a paragraph in poetry, a group of sentences together. And now for several forms of poetry. A couplet. A couplet is two lines that rhyme. A complete idea is usually expressed in a couplet or in a long poem made up of couplets. Couplets may be humorous or serious. Lord Byron's Don Juan is completely made up of couplets. It's a fascinating tale. It's funny, it's heroic, it's a travel story, but it is an entire poem of couplets. I highly recommend Don Juan by Lord Byron if anyone is interested. So, continuing on with couplets, here's an example. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and all sorrows end. This is by Shakespeare. You see how the ends of each sentence rhyme. Chocolate candy is sweet and yummy. It goes down smoothly in my tummy. That would be another example of a couplet. Here's another example that you might be familiar with. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. The couplets rhyme, but they're not necessarily the same word. So let's move on to narrative poems. Narrative poems tell a story. It's a story told in verse by a speaker or a narrator. There is a plot. Something happens because of this. Something else happens because of something else. It can be true or fictional. Poems vary in treatment of the character and setting, so there is no real structure to the character and setting. But forms of narrative poetry include ballad and epic. Let's look at the ballad form. A narrative rhyming poem or song, characterized by short stanzas and simple words, usually telling a heroic and or tragic tale, although some are really funny. We're going to look at a lot of ballads tomorrow when we work with the English Broadside Ballad Archive from UC Santa Barbara. A ballad can be long, it can be short. It's usually rich with imagery, emotionally charged visual images. And it originated from folk songs that told exciting or dramatic stories, which we're going to talk about later on as well. An example from John Henry, a traditional American ballad, is 10 stanzas. When John Henry was a tiny little baby sitting on his mama's knee, he picked up a hammer and a little piece of steel, saying, "Hammer's gonna be the death of me. Lord, Lord, hammer's gonna be the death of me." John Henry was a man just 6 feet high, nearly 2.5 feet across his chest. He'd hammer with a 9-pound hammer all day and never get tired, and want to rest, Lord, Lord, and never get tired and want to rest. The thing about a ballad is it can usually be sung to the tune of Gilligan's Island or the Beverly Hillbillies. So let's try the Beverly Hillbillies. When John Henry was a tiny little baby sitting on his mama's knee, he picked up a hammer and a little piece of steel, saying, "Hammer's gonna be the death of me, Lord, Lord, hammer's gonna be the death of me." So it kind of works. Let's try Gilligan's Island. Uh, when John Henry was a tiny little babe, sitting on his mama's knee, he picked up a hammer and a piece of steel, saying, "Hammer's gonna be the death of me. Lord, Lord, hammer's gonna be the death of me." The ship was a mighty sailing ship, the skipper proud and brave. You see how that works? You can sing these. Always remember, if you can sing it, it's a ballad. Here's an example from The Unquiet Grave, an old ballad that would have been sung to an eerily catchy tune. The wind doth blow today, my love, and a few small drops of rain. I never had but one true love, in cold grave she was lain. See how that works? Narrative poems or epic poems are very long narrative stories. Poems that tell of the adventures of a hero. The purpose is to help the reader understand the past and be inspired to choose good over evil. It usually focuses on the heroism of one person who is a symbol of strength, virtue, and courage in the face of conflict. Narrative poems or epics include the Odyssey and the Iliad. They also include John Milton's Paradise Lost, Beowulf. What else? Hesiod, Theogony. These are all epic narrative poems. So here we are today at lyric poetry, which we read a lot of last week. Let's talk a little bit about lyric poetry. It always expresses some emotion. Poems are a bit shorter than epic poems, and they tend to express the personal feelings of one speaker, often the poet. They give you a feeling that they could be sung also. Originally, Greek poets sang or recited poems accompanied by music played on a lyre, which is a tiny guitar, tiny harp that you hold in your hands. In the Renaissance, poems were accompanied by a lute, it's a small guitar, similar to a mandolin. Sonnets are lyric poetry. Most sonnets are in a fixed form of 14 lines, 10 syllables in each line, and they're usually written in iambic pentameter. The theme of the poem is summed up in the last two lines, and it can be about any subject, but usually sonnets are about love or philosophy. We're going to read sonnets next week. Here's an example of a sonnet. This is from Sonnet 18 by Shakespeare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. As you can see, everything is kind of summed up. His love for her is summed up in those last two lines. So long as men can breathe, their eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So his emotion and his love gives life to the idea of this fair-haired maiden. This is how sonnets work. We're going to spend a whole week on sonnets next week, so we'll get back to more on sonnets later. Let's talk about the ode. The ode is a tribute to someone or something, and it's often uses exalted language in praise or celebration, and it can be serious or it can be humorous. Here's an example. This is Ode to Pablo's Tennis Shoe by Gary Soto. They wait under Pablo's bed, rain-beaten, sun-beaten, a scuff of green at their tips from when he fell in the schoolyard. He fell leaping for a football that sailed his way, but Pablo fell and got up, green on his shoes, with the football out of reach. Now it's night. Pablo is in bed listening to his mother laughing to the Mexican novellas on TV. His shoes, twin pets that snuggle his toes, are under the bed. I really like that one. I think it's really sweet. Elegy is another form, and this expresses grief or mourning for someone who has died. It's a funeral poem. It's somber, it's serious, and it ends on a peaceful note. Let's look at the Elegy for Anne Frank by Jessica Smith. You blossomed and grew between the quiet gray walls of the attic home. A sidewalk surrounded, flower pushed up through the cracks, petals straining for the light, but your roots held you down. In the dim light of your room, you made family trees, the continuing lives comforting you in ways your mother could not. While concentration camps built bonfires with bones of your neighbors, you dreamed of the sun, the love you'd find when the doors of your prison were unlocked. When I took your short life from your diary, I could feel your heartbeat pulse with my own, and every breath you took went into my own lungs. Every desire you felt, I felt too. Your life was held by 4 silent years surrounding you as the 4 walls did, and before the last bomb fell, destroying the last of your love and light, you died, and I am thankful. You see how this poem is a very serious tone to it. It talks about her life, and it talks about how she survived this horrific event. And then, in the end, it honors her memory. So, limericks. Limericks are funny poems. They're five-line poem written with 1 couplet and 1 triplet. So you have 2 rhymed lines and then 3 rhymed lines. So it always follows the same pattern in the same rhyme scheme. And the pattern is you'll have the first 2 and the last line all rhyme, and the 2 in the middle will rhyme. The last line always contains the punchline or the heart of the joke. Often contain hyperbole, onomatopoeia, idioms, and figurative language. These are all things that you should be defining in your literary scavenger hunt. So all of these terms you'll get to know rather well throughout the semester. Okay, let's take a look at some of these limericks. Okay, let's take a little further look at the limerick. You will soon hear the distinctive beat pattern of all limericks. A fly and a flea and a flue were caught, so what could they do? Said the fly, let us flee. Let us fly, said the flea. So we flew through a flaw in the flue. So do you see how we get the A, B, B, A rhyme scheme? So line 1 would be an A, line 2 would be an A, line 3 would be a B, line 4 would be a B, and line 5 would be an A. This is how we do rhyme scheme. Here's another limerick. There was an old person of Dutton, whose head was so small, who was so small as a button. So to make it look big, he purchased a wig and rapidly rushed out about Dutton. Here's another one. Before he even said grace, he sat up and filled up his face. He gorged on salami, ate all the pastrami, then exploded with nary a trace. There was a large bear in a tree who was in pursuit of a bee. The bee was no dummy. He gave the bear money, so the bear let the honeybee free. The limericks are really, really fun, really little, quick, quippy little poems, and usually the first poems you learn to write are either limericks or haikus. So let's talk about free verse for just a minute. Or is that just free? Lines of poetry written without rules, no regular beat or rhyme, unrhymed poetry. Here is a poem by Langston Hughes. Flowers are happy in summer, in autumn they die and are blown away. Dry and withered, their petals dance on the wind like little brown butterflies. There's no rhyme scheme, there's no rules, there's no form or structure. It's just a small little free verse poem about flowers and the seasons. I think it's a really beautiful poem by Langston Hughes. But let's look at haiku, which is a Japanese form of poetry. One line of 5 syllables, one line of 7 syllables, and a final line of 5 syllables. So 5, 7, 5. Fragments, not usually complete sentences, make up haikus a lot. About everyday things, written in the present tense, and much is left unsaid. So these poems are usually kind of evasive. Look at a haiku. Little sparrow child plays on the road. Oh, watch out, horse tramps by. Soft summer twilight, suddenly a sound. Frog leaps in the old pond. Splash! So, a cinquain is a poem that resembles a diamond. It has 5 lines and begins with one word. The second line has 2 adjectives and describes that word. The third line has 3 verbs. The fourth line is a phrase that goes deeper into the topic, and the fifth line gives either a synonym for the first word or a word that encompasses the whole poem. So this is a very structured poem. Let's take a look at some. Sister. Smart, outgoing, loving, playing, laughing, always in for some fun. Friend. Do you see how the term sister is mirrored by the term friend? The second line is describing the sister. She's smart and outgoing. Then we get the verb. She's loving, playing, and laughing. And then she's always in for some fun. And then we get the last line that mirrors the first. All right, this one is called Tucson Rain. The smell, everyone moves to the window to look. Work stops and people start talking. Rain came. So why would the rain be something that stopped people and started them talking? Well, if you look at the title is Tucson Rain. How often does it rain in Tucson? Not very often. It's the desert. So these cinquain examples are thoughtful and put together very carefully. They may seem like just words, but they are put together and thought out very, very carefully, but they always maintain a structure and a form. Here's a few other interesting poetry forms that you don't hear a lot about. List poems. This is one of the oldest forms of poetry. Polynesians used list poems to form an inventory of all of their islands. It's a catalog poem. It can be a long or short poem. It can be rhymed or unrhymed. We're probably going to read a short story by Tim O'Brien that utilizes this list idea as well. So it can be used not only in poetry, but also in prose. So let's look at an example of a list poem. Things a pigeon knows. What does a pigeon know? Eaves and ledges, rafter edges, gutter streams, steel beams, cars and buses, a bridge with its delightful trusses, Sidewalks, culverts, popcorn vendors, taxis and their yellow fenders. Who throws cracker crumbs the thickest? How thin cats are often quickest. Tennis courts, trees and parks, the highest steeple. Swarms of people. This is by Patricia Hubble. And you see that the list poem lists all the things that a pigeon knows. He knows the eaves and ledges of every building, the rafter edges, the gutter streams, the steel beams of the buildings, the cars and buses, the bridge. He knows all of these things. List poems are very, very useful for a lot of things. And if you create poems, they become memorable and you can sing them and pass them down as an oral tradition. These poetic forms come out of necessity. They come out of necessity to remember these ideas. So list poems, you can see how useful these could become. Concrete poetry is poetry in which authors use both words and physical shape to convey a message. As you see here, we zigzag through this crazy life. We search for answers. And the plight, our lives are, well, this is a very hard one to read, basically upside down. But at the end of the day, we still smile. So you see how the author has created this zigzag line and the poetry mimics the poem itself by zigging and zagging. Here's another example of a concrete poem. Daddy's home, he's finally back. With hugs and kisses we'll attack. Then soon enough we will be sitting together with our whole family. And you see that it's in the shape of a heart. This is probably for a father who travels, or maybe a gift, even a gift poem. But you can see from everything that we've gone through, the different types of poetry, the structure that's available. I know that this lecture was supposed to be about lyric poetry, but I thought maybe it would be a better idea to get the different forms of poetry into your head before we jump right off into the lyric poems. So tomorrow your lecture will be on the lyric poems that we read, and then we'll get going on our songs. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or text me. I don't always answer my phone because I'm in classes and meetings a lot, so the best way to get a hold of me is text or leave me a message. Thank you guys for being patient with the video lectures. I have posted last week's video lecture on the covenant poems, the covenant and poems and prayer in the Bible. So if you will be so kind as to look over that. I'm also going to post the videos or the songs so you can listen to those while reading the lyrics and kind of get the feel for the sentiment that the singers and songwriters are putting into these songs. So until tomorrow, have a good day.